blood of one of the butchered Israeli soldiers, reserve soldiers on his hands, the killing, of course, lynching of 2 Israeli reserve soldiers in Ramallah police station. On the right, the iconic picture of little Mohammed al-Dura just before he was shot dead by Israeli troops. These advertisements to the BBC are sent along to us by the BBC to my newspaper. So here is the back of the card, which is actually much more instructive. Now, I'll read it to you. See what's wrong with it. 2 images captured the hatred that has destroyed the peace process in the Middle East. Mohammed, the boy from Gaza, shielded by his father, but still dying under a hail of bullets, and the brutal murders of 2 Israeli soldiers by a Palestinian mob. Yeah, you got it. You see, I'm sorry, having a few audience, I'd like to point it out a bit more. The problem here, as you can see immediately, is who killed little Mohammed. Now, it's most Israelis I've met believe, and certainly many Israeli MPs believe, and most of the journalists, that Mohammed al-Dura was shot by Israeli troops, although some of them may not have known he was behind the wall at the time. But once again, the narrative of the Palestinian suffering is cut short, whereas the full story of the Israeli murders is there. It's ironic, I think. Tom, you can put the lights up again. I'll finish with the machine here now. It's ironic, I think, that among the exceptions to the grotesque and misleading journalism coming out of the Middle East are a few very brave Israeli reporters who question the morality of Israel's actions with a ruthlessness which is rare in any European publication and almost totally absent in the United States. Among the most courageous and eloquent of these Israeli journalists are Gideon Levy and Amira Haas in Haaretz. I know many of you read Haaretz. Those who don't, you should. Amira recently, she and I were talking about what journalism is meant to be about. And I, of course, was waffling on in my Brit way. It's about writing the first page of history, the only, independent witness, etc., etc. She said, no, Robert, you're wrong. She said, the definition of journalism is to monitor the centres of power. As good a definition as I've ever heard for our profession. But it raised an important question. How can Amira Haas say things that her American counterparts shy away from? Why can she say things which far better paid and supposedly more powerful American journalists cannot? At least not without the weasel words that I've been talking about, which immunize them from criticism, which they hope will do so. Needless to say, Haas not only puts us to shame, but Arab journalists as well. For out in the arid wastes of Arab journalism, there is as little interest in serious investigation of the Middle East conflict as there is in the United States. As I know to my cost. Excuse me. I've been abused as a liar by Damascus Radio in 1982 after describing at first hand Syria's bloody repression of thousands killed in Hama, February of '82. In Egypt, I've been called a black dog pecking at the corpse of Egypt. This in the Cairo press for saying that Egypt's elections are rigged. In President Mubarak's last presidential election, he got 98.8%. Not, of course, up to the standards of Saddam's 100%. I should tell you that I've uncovered in my researches through the old Lebanese newspapers that President Kouatly of Syria 40 years or 50 years ago got 110%. He was so stunned by the result that he fired his interior minister and reduced it to 99. Better than Mubarak, not as good as Saddam. Anyway, I was a black dog pecking at the corpse of Egypt. I'll show you now what happened when I wrote about a former British Special Branch officer called Ian Henderson. He's actually Scottish, who was running the Bahrain Interrogation Centre where torture was taking place. This is the small Arab island of Bahrain before the old emir died. And I'll show you what happened. Akhbar al-Halij, anybody here who can... Oh, can you come and help me hold this poster up? Akhbar al-Halij, well, also, let me see this. Published this picture. Oh, it's the other way around. Hold it up as high as you can. There we are. Of 3 dogs. Black dog at the top is the BBC. Here's Bob. Look at this, all this cash we could possibly have if we wanted it. Down here is Christopher Walker of the Times. Not a totally inaccurate picture of him. one more to do. Just drop it on the ground, it's okay. I'll let you have a closer look at Bob. I love cartoons and newspapers. I always want to be a cartoonist. There you are, you see. I have to tell you that the nightmare dentures are pretty accurate. But the problem is this. This dog is meant to be rabid. And rabid dogs have to be exterminated, which is why I don't believe for a moment that this cartoon was a joke. It was a threat. Thank you. Just drop it on the ground. Thanks. In all the Middle East, however, I think nothing quite surpasses our journalistic desire to humour Turkey by obfuscating the reality of the 20th century's first genocide, the deliberate killing of 1.5 million Christian Armenians, most of them slaughtered in 1915 by the Ottoman Turkish authorities. No serious academic, except those holding chairs chairs funded by Turkey, disputes the fact, and anyone who doubts them should read the recently published and excellent Encyclopedia of Genocide by Israel's foremost Holocaust scholar, Israel Chani. Indeed, my own paper, The Independent, now refers to the Armenian Holocaust with a capital H, just as it does to the Jewish Holocaust, of course. Winston Churchill actually called the Armenian suffering a Holocaust in the 1920s. This is what Hitler remembered when he turned to his generals and said, "Who now remembers the Armenians?" It's a very important historical fact. Much of Israel Chani's horrifying documentation comes from 1915 editions of the New York Times. It was then a great scoop for the New York Times, though of course a terrible one to read and see the pictures of. Recently, however, these appalling and bloody events have been almost universally referred to by journalists as disputed. My favourite word it's becoming, like the disputed West Bank and Gaza. And most extraordinary of all, the New York Times, the paper which 86 years ago did more to publicise these massacres than any other paper in the United States, has done its bit to discredit the tragedy. In April of 1998, for example, the New York Times' Stephen Kinzer wrote a report about the 70,000 Armenians who live in present-day Turkey. Here is a key paragraph from his report. I will try to resist sticking my hand up when I come to the bits that are very odd. Relations between Turks and Armenians were good during much of the Ottoman period, but they were deeply scarred by massacres of Armenians by that pro-Ottoman forces in eastern Anatolia carried out in the spring of 1915. Details of what happened then are still hotly debated. Remember the hotly debated, it's one of our favourite phrases. But it is clear, I'm quoting, it is clear that vast numbers of Armenians were killed or left to die during forced marches in a burst of what is now called ethnic cleansing. Just like that. I still read this paragraph with a sense of shock. What did Kinzer mean by deeply scarred? Relations between Turks and Armenians came to a virtual end in 1915 because tens of thousands of Armenians were no longer alive to have relations with. And note the intriguing phrase pro-Ottoman forces, a weasel word that effectively avoids the use of the words Turks or Turkish. Most incredible of all is Kinzer's assertion that the details are hotly debated. Turkey may use its lobby groups to lie about the genocide, and the Turkish government still tries to cover up the massacres as the side effects of civil war. But for the New York Times to present the Armenian Holocaust as a subject of serious dispute is as insulting to Armenians as it is for Jews to hear the facts of their Holocaust disputed or denied. Note how Kinzer, by the way, talks about vast numbers, thus avoiding the key figure of 1.5 million, and how ethnic cleansing takes the place of a much more appropriate word, genocide. Another of Kinzer's articles, written from the Armenian capital of Yerevan, even carried the headline, "Armenia never forgets. Maybe it should." Here's Mr. Kinzer's latest contribution. This is the New York Times of April last year. He's writing about genocide museums in general. Washington already has one major institution, the United States Holocaust Museum, that presents facts which are incontrovertible. But of course, the Armenian Genocide Museum is showing details that are still a matter of intense debate. I got a fascinating email the other day from an Armenian man living in Toronto in Canada. He'd read an article I'd written in The Independent about what I referred to as, and what The Independent called, the Armenian Holocaust. He was a little bit upset, he said, because in the Toronto Globe and Mail, which had syndicated the same article, it did not use the words Armenian Holocaust, which had been edited out. As he said in his letter to the editor of the Toronto Globe and Mail, Mr. Fisk referred to Holocaust, while your version calls it the mass murder of the Armenians. They'd changed the words. So, of course, I called up London immediately to our syndication department, because everybody who takes syndication from our newspaper signs an undertaking not to change the bloody words. Well, they came back to me later and said, "We've got them, Bob. They changed the words, but they didn't even ask to buy the article. They stole it." Fortunately, we have financial penalties for people who steal our articles, so we turned $1, but I wish it hadn't been done. You know, when you look at all this, I ask the same questions as I do about the coverage of the 1982 Sabra and Shatila massacre. Why do we journalists try so hard to avoid the truth, to extenuate, to dissimulate, to cover up? Is it because Turkey is an important political and military ally of the United States? Because it's a valuable purchaser of American weaponry? Is it because Turkey is an ally of Israel? Or because it has a powerful lobby group in Washington? Let's go back to the Arabs and indeed the Muslims in general. I want to give you some small examples now about how Muslim anger comes about. I'm going to take you back to 1993 because that was the year in which I made a 3-part documentary film for the Discovery Channel in America and for Channel 4 television in Britain called Beirut to Bosnia. It attempted to find out why an increasing number of Muslims had come to hate the West. It was an attempt to alert people that something was coming. In fact, the subtitle was Beirut to Bosnia, How Muslims Are Coming to Hate the West. I'll tell you, the New York Times mocked the title, finding it totally irrelevant. Now, I'm going to start by showing you a clip of film which we made in Bosnia, in which you will see life in Sarajevo, and also particularly you will see Bosnian Muslim refugees being thrown from their homes. The issue here, of course, is that well, you won't see the refugees thrown from the homes. You'll see the refugees absent. The issue here, of course, is about what happens to a population when they are thrown out of their own homes. I'd like to show you the film now. If we can go ahead. Tom, we're ready to roll.
Ethnic cleansing. How easily we reporters accepted this phrase. The Muslims who lived in these devastated homes were raped and murdered by the Serbs, not because they were ethnically different from their Serb attackers, but because the Serbs wanted the Muslims' land, and they got it. Our reports of their plunder made no difference. A year ago, The Independent sent me into Serbian Bosnia to search for a village in which Muslims still lived. I found a village called Chela. It had a pretty mosque and a friendly imam who lived in a cottage next door. The Serbs promised to protect them. Now I was going back to see them again, accompanied by 2 watchful Serb policemen.
I'm sure it's the mosque. I went in there before. Keep going, keep going. This I'm sure. Yes, I remember going in here before. This is the mosque. Right. I see the problem here, then. Can you ask the policeman what happened to this mosque? I mean, last time I was here, I walked inside it. It was ordinary. What happened, Kathy? Can you ask him?
Onda što se dogodilo tu za džamiju, za sve?
It's no picture. Okay, all right.
Don't take your phone away if you
All
come
right.
again, he said.
Part of a school book.
I knew what had happened. How long would these Muslims put up with this sort of violence? How can I forget the place where I work, the Middle East? When Muslims there hit out at the West, we say we don't understand them. Mindless terrorism is the phrase we like to use about them. And every time I see things like this, I wonder what the Muslim world has in store for us. Maybe my reports should always end with the same phrase, watch out.
Well, no more mosque.
It had been blown up with explosives. No one would say who did it, and there wasn't any point in asking the Serb police. And here was the cottage in which the Muslim Imam and his family had given me coffee